And once again, let me officially welcome everyone to today's webinar, Untested Sex Evidence in Sexual Assault Cases. This is an information session for an NIJ research solicitation. And I'll turn things right over to today's moderator, Kristina Rose, who is the Deputy Director at the National Institute of Justice.
Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today on our new solicitation, Strategic Approaches to Sexual Assault Kit Evidence in Action Research Project. Again, my name is Kristina Rose, and I'm the Deputy Director here at the National Institute of Justice. And I'm going to be joined today by two of my esteemed colleagues, Michael Sheppo, who is the Office Director for our Office of Investigative and Forensic Sciences, and Dr. Kathy Browning, who is a Senior Social Science Analyst in our Office of Research and Evaluation. Now, the purpose of this webinar is to walk you through the solicitation and respond to your questions. Because of the complexity of the issue, and because this solicitation is a little bit different from the usual NIJ solicitations, we thought it would be helpful to host an open forum to provide information and respond to your questions. Now, this is not a seminar on sexual assault kit backlogs. For those of you who are expecting a more traditional webinar with substantive presentations on sexual assault and untested kits, well, you might be disappointed. This webinar is focused specifically on the solicitation itself. Now, we will be providing some contextual information, but we will not be getting into substantive discussions around the issue. But if you're interested in more information on sexual assault kit, untested evidence, or backlogs in crime labs, you can certainly visit NIJ's website to get more information there. Sorry, this is all kind of new for us, so I may be going back and forth between a few slides. I want to tell you a little bit about NIJ for those of you who are just being introduced to us for the first time. NIJ is the Research, Development, and Evaluation arm of the U.S. Department of Justice, and we have three substantive offices within NIJ. We have our Office of Research and Evaluation, which is the social science. We have the Office of Science and Technology, which is our technology branch, and we have our Office of Investigative and Forensic Sciences. And this project that we're talking about today is a collaborative effort between the Office of Research and Evaluation and the Office of Investigative and Forensic Sciences. Now, NIJ's mission is to build knowledge on crime and justice, and the way that we do that is by awarding grants and cooperative agreements and making contracts, as well as conducting intramural research. And we work with our grantees very, very closely to make sure that the research is going to be relevant to the field, and we disseminate it to the field through a variety of vehicles, including our website, through print publications, conferences, and through our partner organizations. So what is the purpose of this particular solicitation? Well, the purpose is to understand the underlying nature of the problem of large volumes of untested sexual assault kits and to identify effective and sustainable solutions. Now, we are not focusing on short-term fixes here. Our goal is to get to the root causes of why large quantities of sexual assault kits are being discovered in law enforcement agencies. Sometimes you're going to be found in hospitals and other different locations, but all across the country this is happening. But one of the other purposes of this solicitation, in addition to understanding the underlying nature of the problem, is to develop what we're calling transportable lessons that we can share with other jurisdictions experiencing similar issues, and really to improve our criminal justice system response to sexual assault. Now, at this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Mike Sheppo, who is going to give you some background on the issue. Mike?
Thank you, Chris. We've all seen the headlines, I believe. Thousands of rape kits or sexual assault kits in law enforcement agencies sit untested. Crime laboratories that have substantial backlogs of DNA cases are waiting to be analyzed. Delays in submitting evidence to a forensic laboratory, as well as delays in analyzing the evidence, result in delays of justice. In the worst case scenarios, delays can result in additional victimization by serial offenders or incarceration of individuals that have not committed the crime. Evidence collected from crime scenes and stored in law enforcement evidence rooms waiting to be sent to a laboratory for analysis, or maybe not being considered to be sent to the lab for analysis, is not really a crime laboratory backlog. As many of you are aware, some of the headlines about backlogs refer to unsubmitted rape kits or sexual assault kits, which are stored in law enforcement evidence rooms. This particular solicitation is the focus of these particular kits, the ones that have not been submitted from a law enforcement agency to the crime laboratory. NIJ considers untested evidence awaiting submission to laboratories to be a separate and different problem from the backlogs in crime laboratories. Untested evidence in law enforcement custody becomes part of the crime laboratory backlog only when law enforcement agencies submit the evidence to a crime laboratory. Of course, once submitted, the laboratory's backlog is immediately increased, sometimes dramatically. The issue of untested evidence in law enforcement agencies was first measured in an NIJ-funded study published in 2009. Suffice it to say, a nationwide sample of more than 2,000 agencies found that in 2007, 18% of unsolved rape kits, an estimated 27,595 cases, contained forensic evidence that was not submitted by law enforcement agencies to a crime laboratory for analysis. This is a major national problem and one that will continue to make the headlines. There are many reasons why a law enforcement agency might not submit forensic evidence to a crime laboratory. For example, subsequent investigation may show that the evidence is not probative. Charges might have been dropped in the case. The case might be determined to be unfounded, or a guilty plea may have already been taken. However, many believe that all unsubmitted cases should be submitted to the crime laboratory. Others, on the other hand, believe that a triage should occur of those cases. Or still others believe that the cases should only be submitted with the victim's consent. We need to consider how law enforcement agencies decide to submit or not submit evidence to a laboratory. What proportion of unsubmitted cases could benefit from the forensic testing, and how cases should be prioritized for the testing. There needs to be an understanding that a rape or sexual assault kit is only part of the evidence that may be examined in a case. There may be other physical evidence such as clothing, objects, trace evidence, which may have probative value, and this may include non-DNA evidence such as latent fingerprints, fibers, hair, etc. Also, it's imperative that consideration be given to the victim or survivor throughout these processes, from counseling to collection of evidence, law enforcement interviewing, laboratory analysis, and eventual prosecution. When and how communication with the victim occurs is paramount to the victim's well-being and recovery. In considering old backlogged, unsubmitted sexual assault evidence, the timing of the victim's notification needs to be discussed and hopefully resolved. Possibilities for the timing of notification can include when the case is reopened, when a foreign DNA profile is found and uploaded into the CODIS, when no foreign DNA profile is found, when a John Doe DNA warrant is issued, or when a CODIS hit actually occurs. I'd like to turn this over next to Katharine Browning, who will discuss a little bit about the Action Research Project.
Okay, thank you, Mike. These questions are a great segue into a brief discussion of the research approach that we will be using in this project. One of the things I want to emphasize before I get into telling you about action research is that this is a research project, and we are not going into it with any assumptions about what the outcomes will be. So, for example, some sites may find that they want to test all of the kits. Some sites may find that they just want to test some, and some may find that they don't want to test any for whatever reason. This will depend on what the sites identify as the cause of the problem. So we're not going in there with any expected outcomes here. So now to action research. What is it? I have a definition up on the screen. I'm just going to cover it briefly here, but the solicitation provides a number of references on this topic to guide you in this. You can find these on page 5 of the solicitation. Basically, action research is a partnership between researchers and one or more practitioner agencies to use a data-driven, strategic problem-solving process to solve a problem. Oops. Apologize for that. So the next slide here, or the slide that you're looking at, is a nice graphic that displays how the process works. I'm not going to go through it step by step, but it was developed from several previous NIJ action research projects, specifically Operation Ceasefire and SACSI Strategic Approaches to Community Safety Initiative. Again, more details about these projects are provided on page 5 of the solicitation, if you happen to have it there. But these projects used action research to address issues of homicide victimization and gun violence. The process begins with identification of a problem and getting as much data about the nature and scope of the underlying factors of that problem. So we're starting on the left-hand side and following along on the bottom there. Here, in this case, the problem is a large quantity of untested sexual assault evidence. So researchers will assist the jurisdictions in conducting an inventory or review of these cases to find out why these kits did not go forward to the lab for analysis. So once there's a better understanding, everyone can work together to determine what needs to be done in the short term. So with the particular cases in this batch, and long-term. As Chris said, we're looking at long-term solutions. So going forward, what changes need to be made in procedures and how sexual assault cases are handled. So as you can see, there are feedback loops built into the process at multiple points because fixing the problem is an iterative process. You're going to try something new, gather the data on it, see what needs to be tweaked or changed, and then try something else. This slide has the research steps that we identified in the solicitation, and it's a general steps that you will find in most action research projects. But they can be modified as needed. Action research has been used in a number of fields. I believe it actually originated in education. And one of its virtues is that it is flexible, and which is very helpful when you're applying and doing research in the real world. But you will follow this basic process. Chris is going to get into this in more detail in a minute, but this solicitation is for a planning phase in conjunction with the first step that you're seeing there. So you're going to be identifying the problem and then working out strategies to address it and monitoring the process of that, the progress of that, and then at the end evaluating how it all worked out. In fact, I think this is a good point for me to turn it back over to Chris.
Thanks, Kathy. So, who's eligible to apply? States or units of local government, and that includes all the territories and tribes, are eligible to apply for this program. This program is being conducted, or this project is being conducted in 2 phases. The first phase is a 6-month planning grant, and that's the one we're talking about today. Up to $1 million is going to be available in total, split among the selected sites. Phase 2 is going to involve the implementation and the evaluation phases, or portions of the project, and we will have up to $4 million available in total to split amongst the sites. So again, this solicitation is for phase 1 only. And this is how it will work. NIJ will make awards to about 3 to 5 sites, and each site will receive a 6-month planning grant to begin on April 1st of 2011. Phase 2 will be awarded by September 30th, 2011. Now, more details about Phase 2 will be shared at a grantees meeting that we're going to be holding in May of next year. And we intend to request proposals later in the year, next year, and we'll be doing most likely an internal review of the progress that the sites have made in order to make those awards for Phase 2. So let's talk a little bit about Phase 1, or the planning part of this project. In Phase 1, what we will be asking of our grantees is to do an inventory and review of the untested sexual assault kits that they have identified in their jurisdiction. We are looking for sites to have a minimum of 500 untested sexual assault kits from which to work. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be a workshop in Washington, D.C. in May of 2011. And at that workshop, we will be covering, over the course of 2 days, sexual assault kit issues, action research issues, and we will have each of the sites give a presentation on their approach. Now, this workshop does not need to be included in the budget for people who are thinking of applying for this, for Phase 1. We have already set aside funds that can be used for this. I'd like to talk a little bit about what the application should include. The first and most important part of this project is to have letters of commitment from all of the partners. That means the research partner and all of the practitioner partners. And this is a must. If you don't submit letters of commitment from all of your partners, the application will not go to peer review. And when we're talking about practitioner partners, we're talking about law enforcement, prosecution, crime lab, victim advocates, and then, of course, the research partner. When you are submitting the letters of commitment, you will want the letters to make sure that it is very clear that an effective partnership is going to be exists between the researchers and the practitioner agencies. You'll also need to identify your key team members and their roles on the project. We've also asked that each applicant submit a name for a site coordinator. Now, this is a really important job, and this person will serve really as the point of contact for your jurisdiction. It can be a current member of the team, or it can be a new hire. This person will make sure that all the trains are running on time and that you meet all of the milestones associated with the project. We'd also like as detailed a description of the extent of the untested kits that you have currently in your jurisdiction. And what we mean by that is really what you know at this point. We don't need to know the case details or anything specific to each one of the cases, but what we do need to know is how many you have, maybe where they're located, that kind of information. Normal casework. That means cases that have been sent to the crime lab, that you've already requested testing on, that are a normal part of your process, should not be included here. What we really want to keep our eyes on are the untested kits that you have not yet submitted to the crime lab, or they may be lined up for the crime lab, but you haven't made the actual request yet for the testing. We'd also like to know about your current practices and procedures that you might already have in place and where some gaps may exist. And very importantly, we are going to need to have some evidence of your willingness and ability to commit investigative resources once that you have gotten hits or there have been results obtained from moving these kits through the system. And this is critical because we know that in some jurisdictions they've put a lot of efforts toward getting kits tested, but they haven't followed up by making the investigative portion available to follow up on the leads and follow up with victims. And we want to make sure that we have the entire scope of this issue covered. So that's going to be really, really important. Looking at the time frame for 2011, because that's when a lot of our key milestones will be met. January 18th is when the solicitation closes. We originally had January 17th. We had not done our homework and realized that that was Martin Luther King Day, and the federal government is closed that day. So we wanted to make sure that we would be around and available on the very last day of the solicitation period. So it will be closing on January 18th. And then right after that, we are going to be moving into the peer review and award decisions, and we expect to make our final award decisions in March for Phase 1, and we'll be announcing them sometime in March. April 1st is when the research project will begin. Again, in May is when we will be holding the workshop in Washington, D.C., and then October 1st of 2011 is when Phase 2 will begin. So you may be surprised at how quickly this is all moving along, but we feel very strongly that this is an issue that really can't wait, and we have made the necessary arrangements to make sure that we could move very quickly through these steps, and we are going to keep to them as best that we can. Now, in terms of how the planning funds can be used, we expect you to be able to use these for your personnel costs, and that means all the partners, research partners, and all of the practitioner agency partners. Travel expenses for any meetings and project activities that you need to do within your team. The group meeting expenses, if you need to, work at, set up your meetings at an outside office, or however you need to coordinate it, you can use the money for that. You can use the money for doing the inventory and review of your cases, which is going to be necessary to move into the next stage of the action research, and then for any preliminary DNA screening or analysis. And for those of you who are interested in a little bit of action research humor, we did find this cartoon that we thought was kind of cute. I'll give you a second to read that. And now to recap, applications are due on January 18th. This webinar will be available in a few days at the website that is listed below, and we will be developing frequently asked questions as a result of this webinar, and we will be posting those as well at that same site. We thank you so much for your, thank you, Jim. Jim has put up the actual site and what it looks like there, which is very helpful, and we will continue to keep you updated through that particular area on the NIJ website. We have been so excited about the interest that has been demonstrated on the part of all of you who have signed up for this particular seminar, but also the calls and the emails that we've been getting. And we are ready to stand by here and respond to your questions. And what we're doing is we have received a couple of questions already, and we will be reviewing those questions and announcing them to the group. So I'm just going to take a moment here to look through the questions and then bring them up, and I will be kind of assigning them out to some of the folks we have here. And there's a lovely photograph of me that you can be looking at while I am doing this. We have a question here. Can the site coordinator be a staff member of the research entity? And that is not a staff funded at the local or state government. And the answer to that is yes. The site coordinator can be a staff member of the research entity. We will also need the person, somebody from the state or local government that is the actual kind of formal contact with the grant. We'll also need to be in touch with that person, but it's fine for the site coordinator to be with one of the other agencies. Another question that we've gotten in is, it says, when applying for this grant, do the kits have to be located only in law enforcement agencies? Or can they be located in a local hospital? We realize that untested kits are also located in hospitals. Sometimes they're located in rape crisis centers, and that is perfectly fine. We think the majority will probably be in law enforcement agencies, but if you have them located in other places, that should not be a problem. We have a question here. One of our attendees wants us to be clear on the point around the inventory of collected but not tested sexual assault evidence kits. Yes, that's exactly what we're looking for. There's a question here. There is somebody on the call who is interested in knowing who else is online today to possibly inquire about other partnership opportunities. And actually, Jim Cooney, I'd like to ask you if that's possible.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Sure. Is there any way for attendees to see who is on the call today to determine, to make some contacts?
Yeah, I actually noticed that question too. What I'll suggest for now is that we maybe have an offline discussion about that. I'll just make a note to all attendees that we do collect some basic information on all of you, as you no doubt noticed when you registered for the event. But we also make a note on that registration page that we won't contact people for anything beyond, things specific to this event. So I think we can work out something where we can share some information at least with each other to facilitate those connections. Yeah, maybe I can talk about it with the panel after the event.
Thank you, Jim. Mike or Kathy, there's a question here that I'm hoping that you might be able to go into just a little more detail on for one of our attendees. It says, can you explain a little more about the audit? We're actually now calling that a review and inventory that is required in the first phase of the project.
Yes, Chris, this is Mike. Basically what we're looking at here is the ability to go in and actually look at the cases that you have. Of course, we want to have a number. The location of where they are, of course, is very important also. And some of the characteristics possibly of the cases, just the basics though, nothing in great detail at this point. But, you know, you could have a situation where a particular organization has already started to look at this particular problem, this concern, with untested evidence, and they may have already started into some type of a triage situation or whatever. That would not necessarily disqualify them from participating in this project.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, also, I just wanted to add just a reminder that we will be putting out some FAQs online in a few days. So this information will be going out to you to try to answer where we're going to address a lot of these questions, particularly if there are any that we don't get to.
Thanks, Kathy. I have gotten a request to clarify the grant amounts again, which I'm happy to do. We have $1 million available for Phase 1. We expect to make up to 5 awards of $200,000 each. If there are less than 5 sites, there may be more money to go around. But right now, we anticipate having 5 sites at $200,000 each. For Phase 2, we will have up to $4 million available. Hopefully, we will have a budget by then. We are all keeping our fingers crossed for our 2011 federal budget. And we will split that $4 million amongst the sites for Phase 2. So I hope that that provides the clarity that you need.
I see a question here. One of our crime labs serves as a storage place for the untested kits. Is that a problem? No, that is not a problem. Obviously, the kits should not be, though, the normal casework that's coming in the door on a regular basis. However, if these kits have been submitted to the laboratory and they are from previous years where there was maybe no intent to submit them or other reasons that they weren't submitted, it would be okay if those are already at the crime laboratory. So what we're looking at is that particular group of kits that was not tested for some reason in the past, not the normal case flow that you're normally getting in the door on a regular basis.
We have another question that says, does it matter how old the kits are as far as the project goes? And no, it does not matter. We have a question here that says, what type of participation is anticipated from rape crisis centers, and is there a preference they be local centers or state coalitions? That's actually a really good question. We do require that a victim service agency participate and be one of the partners because we anticipate that some of the research questions that will appear are going to have something to do with notification issues around victims. The way that we have defined victim services organizations is as so. A community-based victim service organization is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization that assists sexual assault victims, and that is including rape crisis centers, faith-based organizations, and other organizations with a documented history of effective work concerning sexual assault. So the way that we have written it here, it could include both local rape crisis centers or a state coalition as the victim services partner.
I see a question here also. Why would you conduct preliminary DNA screening and analysis during the research phase? That's the first part of this question. The reason, first of all, the whole project both the initial phase and the second phase, all of this is action research. The first is basically the planning stage. The solicitation does mention that if, in fact, monies are available during that first phase to begin some of the analysis, it could be used for that. But that necessarily will not happen. It doesn't have to happen that way. The second part of the question is also, should the lead applicant be a law enforcement agency with a backlog applying via the city, or the crime lab that processes the cases via their county or state? As far as the lead agency or it doesn't matter what part of the coalition or group that you put together. Any of you can be the lead agency. It doesn't specifically have to be the law enforcement agency. And it has to be state and local, of course.
We do have a question here that says, are you all looking at cases where the statute of limitations has not run for purposes of this project, or does the statute of limitations matter at all at this point? We are not, it does not matter at this point whether the statute of limitations has run, because one of the questions that may come up as one of the research questions is, do you test kits after the statute of limitations has run? So you shouldn't be considering that at this point in time. There's another question about how many sites will be selected for Phase 2. Well, we're hoping that all of the sites that are selected for Phase 1 will make it into Phase 2. We have every reason to believe that that will happen, but if a site is not doing well and it does not appear that the project will be successful, and that will be based on the proposal for Phase 2 that the site submits, they may not make it into Phase 2. But our hope is that everyone that is funded in Phase 1 will be funded for Phase 2. There's an interesting question here. It says, does it matter if the defendant has pled guilty and we still have the untested kit? We don't expect you to be, that's not important for Phase 1, because that kind of information will be realized as the review and the inventory of the untested kits is going on in Phase 1. So at this point, if it's untested, it can still be included as part of your kit, your inventory of untested kits. There's a question here about if a police department has its own crime lab and property room where these untested kits are stored, other than the DA's office, who else would we need to partner with? And you absolutely have to have a partnership with a victim services organization as well as a research partner. There's a question here about if a site does not have 500 kits, can we use 2 sites? And I would say that we would prefer not to do that unless you can make a compelling case for doing so. What we want to do is make sure that we have sites with a large enough quantity of untested kits that this can be a successful research project. I don't know, Kathy, if you wanted to weigh in on that at all.
Chris, I can think of a situation where you may have a county and a city that are individual agencies where they may have 300 kits or whatever cases within each of the 2 agencies that they could partner since they are on one locality. That might be something that we could consider.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking about while you were saying that is if we wanted to look at rural, local jurisdictions who are all submitting to like the state crime lab or something similar to that kind of a situation. I guess we would just have to see the justification and see the need demonstrated in terms of the impact that those untested kits, if it was less than 500 kits, was having on that particular jurisdiction.
Yeah, I would agree, definitely agree.
Yeah, I just want to let people know that we are having some technical difficulties in one of the rooms reading some of the questions, so I apologize for being slow. At this point, Chris is the one that's pretty much seeing them and having to throw them out to us. So.
Oh, I didn't know that, guys. I'm sorry. There's a question here that says, can Phase 2 funding be used by crime labs to process kits? And yes, the answer to that is yes.
And the approaches that they take can be varied, of course. That's the whole purpose of this. It would be something that would be determined as the project is going on. There could be also evaluations and interventions that occur as the project's going on where it may be determined that a situation exists in the laboratory where it could become more efficient by doing a certain thing. We would certainly want that intervention to occur at that point. It may be decided that outsourcing is more appropriate rather than doing the work in-house. So there's a whole bunch of different things that can happen. We can't predict anything, though. That's the whole purpose of the action research.
Hey, Kathy, I'm wondering if you can help our folks. We've gotten a couple of different questions that are similar about defining what a research partner is. And folks are wondering, is that somebody that can be within the local law enforcement agency or the victim service agency, or does it have to be affiliated with the research organization? So maybe you could kind of talk about that a little bit.
That's a good question. I mean, I think we had envisioned it being somebody at a university or at a research organization. I mean, you really want somebody who has a background and some experience doing action research. I don't know if that capacity is within the police department, I don't know if that would exist, but I would say that we'd be open to other arrangements. I mean, what the key issue here is that the researcher knows about the action research. I think the other issue, though, that you'll have to keep in mind is you really do want somebody who's external to the agencies involved here, because you want somebody who's coming into it objectively and who, doesn't have any kind of stake. So I think that would be the main thing that I would be concerned about, having somebody within law enforcement. So as a general rule, it would be a university or a research agency.
This is Mike. I do know there have been situations where large agencies have had researchers affiliated with them, particularly large police agencies and state police agencies, where you'll have a person that has a research degree, a PhD, in a particular researching area, and they would be able to, in fact, probably add to it. It might not be the best idea for them to do it for their own agency, but they might do it for another agency that's involved in this project.
There's a question here that says, it's basically about the limit on the number of partners. And I would just say, we don't want to limit anyone. If you've got somebody that you think would make an excellent partner and would strengthen your approach to this project, that's great, but you just have to keep in mind the budget limitations, that you'll be working within. So you want to make sure that you can pay people that you invite to be part of the project. So that there is no official limit on the number of partners. There's a question about whether this project will look at any tested kits, and right now that is not within the scope of this project. We're looking at untested kits. Hey, Mike, there's a question here that I'm hoping you can answer. The question is, does not testing mean not screened, or screened but not DNA tested, or either? So basically, if you could help define what not tested means.
Well, definitely not DNA. That's the whole purpose. We possibly could use kits that have been looked at to determine whether or not there is physiological fluids present, and before they have been turned over to actually do the DNA testing. Ideally, though, you would like to look at everything from the beginning, at least in my opinion. Kits that have not been screened nor tested would be the best, the best group that you would want to look at.
Thanks. The question came up if the DC workshop is, whether or not that's included in the award. Let me be clear that the DC workshop does not need to be included in your budget, because we have set aside separate funds to pay for that meeting. There's also another question about whether we would consider awarding a grant to a rural site. We would love to have a rural site as long as you can meet the requirements of the project. That would be wonderful. There's another question on whether partners can some partners agree to be unfunded partners and serve in an advisory capacity. Absolutely. We just want to make sure that if partners are not being reimbursed or compensated, that they are well aware of that and agree to that up front. But if you have folks who want to just contribute that, without being paid, terrific.
I want to add something to that, though, that we still need to make sure, particularly if that partner is one of those key team members, that they're going to be putting in the time and the level of commitment to the project, even though they're not getting funded. So that'll need to be clear in the proposal, the amount of time and the commitment.
Hey, Kathy, there's a question here about the research collaborators that are affiliated with universities. It's kind of a two-part question.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, for the research collaborators affiliated with universities, would they be developing a subcontract for any funds allocated for research staff, since researchers cannot be the primary applicant? And the second question, actually, do you want to go ahead and answer the first part?
Yeah, actually, I think this is the one question that I can pull up. Yeah, I mean, I would expect that you would be doing it through a subcontract to the university. And let's see, the second part. The second part is about whether or not NIJ can facilitate the reduction or waiver of the indirect costs. That's, I mean, not that I'm aware of. That is something we run into with all of ours, although I don't know through a subcontract what I'd have to look into if that affects it. Hopefully, though, I mean, the $200,000 for a 6-month planning grant, that's part of the reason there's so much money available there, depending on the amount of time that you're able to do that or to put into that.
Thanks, Kathy. There's a question here about the meeting in D.C. and whether it's just for the project managers, site coordinators, or the leaders from each group. Our desire is to have the whole team, the key people that you put into your proposal, to have representatives from all the practitioner agencies as well as the research agency at the D.C. meeting. There's a question here, and we'd actually thought about this question a little bit yesterday, about whether there is a limit on the number of kits considered. And at this point, no, there is no limit. And the second part of it is whether there are kits with child victims and adult victims. Would we want them to focus on either one or both? And I believe we decided that it did not matter. Is that right, Kathy?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think the whole purpose of this is to look at the whole array and the whole number of different types of sexual assault evidence that hasn't been analyzed, regardless of where it came from, age group, reasons behind not submitting, etc. That's the whole purpose. So definitely, I don't think any of those criteria would eliminate or make one type of kit more preferenced?
Can we go back to the... There's a question here about if a private research partner is being considered, how do we reconcile bidding the work with having the letters of commitment? And it goes on to ask additional questions about getting a bid from that partner, putting it in the budget. And really, you're going to have to kind of work that one out because what we're going to be interested in is you will have taken care of that beforehand, and that what you're submitting to us is an agreement between you as the state and local representative and the research partner. That decision has already been made, and you've entered into this this commitment.
Yes, and certainly I think the time that we've allowed the solicitation to stay open should facilitate the abilities to get all of those things done and taken care of, prior to submitting your solicitation.
Mike, here's a question that, and Kathy, well, let me throw this out there and we'll answer it. It says, if a law enforcement agency has looked at their untested kits, has identified, it looks like about 500 kits, they've met with their state lab and they've just recently begun submitting them to the lab, could they still apply for this grant?
Yes. I think Kathy and I are both shaking our heads yes.
Right. I think that basically is kind of the stuff we were talking about yesterday, isn't that right?
Right, yes. And I mean, the expectation is that you know, when the researcher comes in, they're not going to start all over, but they're going to look at what you did, and they're going to start helping you look at, more details about those cases. I don't know to what extent you all looked at the case characteristics or anything. So there will be a little bit of starting over, but yeah, or backing up. I'll put it that way. But they would come in to see what you've done, what else might need to be done, and take it forward from there.
We're looking at a few more questions here. Just try to be patient with us. There are a few more we want to get to here. One of the questions is, should the research partner be the site coordinator, since the site coordinator is ultimately responsible for compiling the data? This is completely up to you. I've seen these projects work in different ways. I think that it's going to kind of depend on the person that you have selected as your site coordinator, their skills and abilities. You may want that person in the research agency. You may want them in the law enforcement agency. There is no correct answer to that one. It really needs to be determined by you.
Right, I agree with that. You need to look at, at the amount of time that various folks can put into it and what makes sense for your jurisdiction.
Again, to clarify, the research organization cannot be the applicant, but they can be, but this unit of local government or the state government has to have a research partner. And it can be either a university, It can be a private research organization. It can be your local university. It can be one of the more national research agencies. Again, we're pretty flexible about that.
Yeah, and I think we agree. They can be the site coordinator, of course, the research agency. However, they cannot be the actual grantee.
Yeah, I agree.
Mike, there's a question here about the backlog grants. It says, if we outsource untested kits with another grant, would this disqualify us from the solicitation? I mean, this is more of a phase 2 kind of question, but I can't imagine that it would be a problem to use backlog reduction funds.
Absolutely not. In fact, that's a perfect use of the funding, obviously, and secondly, it would fit right into this particular solicitation as part of the action research that's being done. It could be something that would obviously be evaluated, whether or not they're getting the bang for the buck, for example, if they were outsourcing, or whether or not that's the best approach. That would be something we would be interested in finding out. So, no, that's a perfect use of the funds, and it does nothing in any way to harm them applying for this solicitation.
There's a good question here. It says, is the eventual goal of the study to create a national standard that may be implemented nationwide? No, not necessarily. The goal would be to develop, based on the study findings, evidence-based practices, or practices that are shown to work based on the evidence that we can share with other jurisdictions. We would love to be able to create protocols that can serve as guidance for jurisdictions that are facing large quantities of untested kits, because we know sometimes these large quantities are discovered and it's a surprise to everyone. They, have a manageable backlog, wake up the next morning and find they have a backlog of, 7,000 to 10,000 kits. And I know I'm not supposed to be using the word backlog, but the goal really is to be able to identify strategies that work, so that when a jurisdiction does find themselves in a situation like this, they have resources that have been proven that they can use to find solutions to their own issues. And hopefully get a nice variety of sites so that we can they will fit for other jurisdictions of the same size and cultural makeup and whatever.
Right. I think what we'll get out of this project are a lot of lessons learned. And, depending, hopefully we do have some variety in the types of sites that we have, and finding out what works for you all. I mean, the goal is to also, within each site, is to correct the problems. We are going in, I guess, with one assumption that something has happened that has created a batch of untested kits that we don't know why. And so it's to fix those issues, but then be able to take the lessons learned from these sites so that other sites can not have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak.
Right, and one size really doesn't fit all in any of these situations. There may be some, putting together a toolkit, so to speak, of the results of what we find from this action research projects. We could end up with a number of recommended ways in which you can address the concerns of your own agency.
I got a question here that I'd like to respond to, and it's somebody is questioning the 200,000, and if that is, it seems like a lot to them to be doing the analyzing the problem and developing the strategies and the research design, and I think that it's going to differ in different jurisdictions depending upon how extreme the issue is, and I think the budgets are going to look a little bit different from place to place, but we wanted to make sure that we did have adequate funding in case new people needed to be hired for this project. In addition, if the entire amount of money that is designated for Phase 1 is not completely spent by the end of Phase 1, it can be used to be put toward Phase 2. Kathy or Mike, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I totally agree. I think in all probability, if the funds wouldn't all be spent and they continue with the Phase 2, it's appropriate to use the funding in Phase 2. Also, as you said, Chris, there are going to be some agencies that may have to hire people, may have to use contractual funds. There's all kinds of variations. Some of the agencies may have resources already within their agency that they can utilize, and therefore their budget may be lessened than or less than some of the other agencies. But again, the funding can be continued.
Right, and we wanted to have enough there so that, there's some sites that are finding very large numbers there, and if you're starting from the beginning and having to put whatever resources over time into starting your inventory from scratch, then I think the 200,000 won't be quite as large as you might think. So we're trying to prepare for all contingencies.
Yeah, you have things like callback, overtime, et cetera, that could occur where you're going to have people come in to inventory the sexual assault kits and the sexual assault evidence. There's all kinds of variations.
Well, and the other thing is if you don't think you need $200,000, don't apply for that much. Make your budget realistic as to the amount that you will need to conduct Phase 1. Okay. There is a question here that says, it's a question about whether, it says, I thought we were interested in sexual assault kits of a probative nature. If so, then why would we want to include those sexual assault kits that are already beyond the statute of limitations, or kits collected from complainants that are now uncooperative or for whatever reason would now not be a prosecutable case, or cases that will not meet the criteria for CODIS entry?
Right. We are starting before you know that in many of these cases. So let's say if you open up the door and have found a large number of untested kits, there's some jurisdictions that won't know which cases are which and how many. So that's why we're not expecting sites to already know how many would fall there. So in terms of, it'll be up to the jurisdiction as to whether they send them forward to actually be tested. We're not making a call on that piece at all. We're not telling you that those beyond the statute of limitations should go forward. That it'll be up to each jurisdiction as to which one. So, but in terms of what can be included in that 500, and please keep in mind that 500 is the minimum. We expect that there may be more, and will be in some jurisdictions.
Yes, and we do totally understand the whole concept of triage. The question that we're looking at, though, has to be open-minded as to whether or not a particular triage is the best way to approach this problem of untested sexual assault kits. So we're looking at it completely with fresh eyes and trying to come up with the best approaches, the best answers.
Right. And one other thing to keep in mind, that past the statute of limitations doesn't necessarily rule out that it's probative. Could be probative in terms of finding a serial rapist and all.
That could actually have a case that has not passed the statute of limitations. So there are all kinds of variations, and we're not trying to be biased in any way as far as the approaches that you may take in this. The whole idea, as I said earlier, was to look at what you're doing, to see if it's the best way that it should be done. If there are corrections that need to be made mid-course, interventions that need to be made, then they should be done to see what the effect is. It may be positive, it may be negative.
We've gotten a couple of questions about anonymous reporting. Cases that are at the hospital, the victim has not determined that they are going to report to law enforcement, and whether those cases for which they do have a protocol for destroying them after a certain amount of time can be included in this study. And I am at this point inclined to say no. Mike and Kathy?
I mean, that's not the focus of the project. It's not that there might not be circumstances where if that some of those cases would be part of. I'm trying to think of all the different scenarios, but no, that really what we're focusing on is cases that have been reported to law enforcement.
There are some questions about Phase 2 and what would be the next steps heading into Phase 2. And what we will likely do is we will have a much more detailed plan around Phase 2, and we'll be presenting that at the May meeting for the selected grantees. But we have, there's a question about whether, you know, the jurisdiction selected for Phase 1 would come and present what they've done, and I can't say that we've really gotten to that level of detail yet, but we will be sharing that information with the persons who are selected in terms of how they will be applying for the funds for Phase 2.
Just one other thing to remind y'all while Chris is looking at questions. Just remember when putting in the proposal, you know, a key piece of this, which we haven't really talked about, is the victim notification issues. I mean, Mike had discussed it as part of the presentation that, you know, when to notify victims, how to notify victims. A lot of this will come out as part of the project that you're doing, but you need to start thinking about this now. And so, you know, to the extent that you can address some of that in the proposal would be helpful.
There's a question about whether a detailed plan for the use of Phase 1 funds needs to be included in the proposal, and I would say yes, absolutely. There's also, in the solicitation, there is an application checklist on page 19, which includes all of the information that needs to be submitted in the proposal. Some of you are inquiring whether you can get in touch with us outside of the webinar to ask specific questions, and the answer to that is absolutely. Our phone numbers and emails of Dr. Browning and mine are on the front page of the solicitation, which is located on the NIJ website. And you can absolutely call us or email us. We've already gotten a number of questions, and we try to turn those around as soon as possible. again, clarification on the anonymous reporting. If there's no law enforcement notification at this point, it probably would be outside of the scope of this project. Questions that we have not been able to get to today, it's either because your question was already answered once or twice, or because it takes a more elaborate answer than we can do on this particular webinar. So yes, questions that are not answered today, we will do our best to work them into our FAQs, our frequently asked questions. Or if you want to contact us individually, we can work through those questions with you.
You might notice that on your screen that the URL where we'll be posting the frequently asked questions should be showing. So I think that'll be available fairly soon after this webinar.
At this point, we do not have any additional questions. And if you do have a question and you've been kind of hesitant to ask, you might want to do it at this time. Or again, as I mentioned earlier, you can submit them to us individually and we'd be happy to answer them. This webinar will be posted on the NIJ website. And a list of FAQs will be also listed on the NIJ website. There's a question here. Kathy, maybe you can help out with this. It says, can the majority of the funding be subcontracted to the research entity where the site coordinator will be staffed?
I'm assuming that that's for the planning grant. Yes, that might make sense because that's where a lot of the work and particularly with the indirect costs. I mean, my expectation would be down the road that wouldn't be the case. But sure, I mean, there's maximum flexibility here in terms of jurisdiction, and that's why we don't want to prescribe too tightly in these areas. You need to do what makes sense for you and then make the case to us that this is a strong plan for your jurisdiction.
We did get a question that asks about can Phase 1 or 2 money be used to develop and maintain SART protocols and procedures and teams. My initial reaction is this money should not be going to programs or teams unless it is part of the strategy that is being implemented to respond to the research question, the research problem. Do you agree with that, Kathy and Mike?
Definitely, I agree with that. I mean, that's not, that's assuming now, I mean, what you really want to do is, as the research gets underway and you start identifying what strategies, if one of them were to be that you need a protocol, then it might make sense. But just something more directive there, saying off the bat, saying that, when we want to, improve a protocol, that would not be appropriate, I think.
We got another question asking about who can serve as the lead on the project, and I'm assuming they're possibly thinking about the site coordinator. And what we realize here is that every single management plan or the plan that you put together is going to be unique to your jurisdiction. And what we would ask is that you put forward a proposal of a management plan for this solicitation that works best for your jurisdiction. And if that means that the victim services coordinator is going to be your lead person, that works fine for us. We want a successful research project, so we don't want to force you into any kind of a model or a mold. We want you to tell us how you think it's going to work best.
Right, I agree. Previous experience in demonstration projects when we go far beyond the research questions themselves and try to prescribe who should do what, we have to make changes. We can't look at org charts or your government charts and know, who's going to provide the best leadership on a project and who has experience in something like that, who could really be an asset to the project and who would be a good coordinator. So we're trying to stay out of that. You all should make that decision based on what seems to make the most sense for you.
And funds can be used to hire folks for the project and for overtime. Yes. Okay, at this point we have gotten, nope. I spoke too soon. Okay. I'm just going to clarify again that the victim services should be community-based, nonprofit, but it does not mean that it can't be your state coalition or another victim organization that has adequate knowledge around sexual violence issues. Okay, I think the time has come to end this webinar. I want to thank my colleagues, Mike Sheppo and Kathy Browning, for participating here with me. I want to thank Jim Cooney from Harvard University for helping us to host this live web chat. And I want to thank all of you who have participated and asked really good, really serious questions that have helped us even give further thought to the solicitation, and we wish the best of luck to all of you who are considering applying for these funds. And if you have additional questions, please feel free to contact us, and we will do our best to answer those for you. Thank you very much. At this point, I'll turn it over to you, Jim, to close things out.
Thank you, Kristina, and I'll just add that, once again, we'll be posting the recording of this webinar along with these slides. That is permissible to post these slides as well as the recording, Chris?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, great. So yeah, we'll be posting both of them within the next 3 business days, and you'll be contacted by email when those go up. And with that, I think we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.